Hi, this is Meredith from Meredith's Lucky Stars Astrology. Thank you for watching this video. I am an astrologer in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I would like to talk to you about the sun sign moving through the different astrological houses. So the sun sign is your ego expression. It's the you choose to be as an adult. And the houses look like little pie slices when you move around the birth chart wheel. And they all represent something different, and they can be seen as chronological. They line up with the 12 signs. So there's different like stuffs that the signs all deal with, and the house placement of the sun can represent like what it is that keeps coming up for you, or like your soul's growth, and it can also represent like your career path and like where you spend a lot of your time. So if you have your sun in the first house of your birth chart, you might be construed as a big personality. Like when you walk in the room, people notice you. And that can be good or bad depending on the sign that's in the first house and also the aspects that are being made to it. Like some people could be seen as a really nasty big personality, like straight from the gate, depending on the aspects that are being made. It just depends. Like everything in astrology is dependent on everything else, like in a person's individual chart. That's why looking at one thing is kind of challenging, at least for me as an astrologer. So I would say that if somebody has their sun in the first house, then they are there in this lifetime to focus on themselves. For the most part, like they kind of like their thoughts are occupied with themselves and they don't have any problem, like say someone with an eighth house sun being their greatest advocate, and going out and seeking exactly what they want in the world. These people could be a little bit competitive and like a little bit like me and my ego and my ego's needs. And I think that that definitely like can be a hindrance as far as like relationships go, and like even making and building relationships. It can be challenging because there's such a self-focus, which isn't necessarily bad because the first house represents the self. It's like it's corresponded with Aries. It's like the first house. It's like the newborn baby where like you only really know as like a baby that you exist, and then you find out that others exist, and then you find out that things exist, and then so on and so forth. It's like the way that these people come across will be very much dependent on the sign that's in the first house. Like if you have like a Sagittarius sun in the first house, then they're going to be really like just focused on like the truth within themselves and getting higher learning for themselves, and also finding like a spiritual path for themselves that they can carve out the way for. It's a very innovative house, so these people are going to have like innovations come to them, and that's good. But it also like you have to be able to share the spotlight. You have to be able to know when to let others speak and when to like listen, and like to kind of give like diplomacy, and to like allow for others to kind of hold their own space. Other than that, I think that this is a very like healthy ego disposition placement, unless something kind of like takes that overboard that's present in the rest of the chart. Um, so when you have your sun sign coming into the second house represents personal finances and material development, and like material things, and the things of like the physical house, like some of the like nuts and bolts that come into place to kind of like creating that safe space. But also the second house can represent possessions, and it can also represent your value, like your self-esteem, and like the kind of the self-esteem that either comes from having things or renouncing things, or kind of just realizing that true happiness doesn't come from what you have, but who you are. I think that might be something that a lot of second house sons come into contact with in their life, is trying to find their happiness and their self-esteem and their value based on like what they have, be it like a new purse or this car that they're driving or the house that they're living in or the person that's on their arm. Really, it depends. But I feel like I've seen 2 or 3 different second house sons in my personal life. They've, sorry, I'm kind of sick. They've had a hard time, like, kind of like with the stuff of things, like with material possessions, and they've been like consumed with that. So later in life, there's like renouncing of that stuff that happens. But I think that's dependent on the signs, the aspects, just like everything else. Another thing about this placement is that they can be very reticent to change. So the second house is ruled by Taurus, or it's related to Taurus, rather. So I think that when you have a sign like Taurus, it's like very durable and very enduring, like for the long term. Like it can really like stay. But when change is thrust upon it, it can be a different story. It can totally shake these people's worlds all up and they don't know how to deal, especially when it's a change that they don't want. And I think just like knowing that and like kind of like finding the strength to like let go and embrace embrace the chaos, because the world is full of chaos, as we all know. And there's nothing that you can really do to physically prevent that kind of change. I think that that's like a really valuable lesson for a second house sun to know. All right, so in the third house, the sun takes on a rather Gemini expression, because Gemini is the natural, it's related to the third house. So the third house represents siblings, short distance travel, like kind of like the movement about your little neighborhood. It also represents media and communication, and like what kind of like what that brings with it, all the stuff that like these communications bring. I think that when someone has their sun in the third house, they can be very they can require like a frequent change of scenery, and they can be moving about their lives and have lots of stuff going on all the time. Like they can be kind of like scatterbrained, or like kind of like spreading themselves too thin. Whether it's like learning and like finding out new information, or moving about their environment, doing favors for people. It just depends on the sign that's in the third house. But I think also that like that like the third house and with the sun, like the sun is kind of an external placement. So sometimes there can be a challenging time with gossip, and to not know like when to shut your mouth and when to like keep things to yourself. Like if you have a third house sun, then maybe you should be more mindful of your communications, and that the stuff that you're sharing is yours to share. That's a little bit about the sun in the third house. I think that like media and communication and writing is a great outlet for you, and that like you should really use that to your benefit and not use your gifts of communication in a negative way. Loose-lipped, as they say. So when